Ukraine says its troops are continuing their slow advance in the south against Russian forces dug in along the front lines. Russian-backed officials in the Donetsk region say one person was killed and 9 wounded by Ukrainian shelling villages there. Ukraine's leaders insist the 3-month-old counteroffensive is making progress, even if it's not as quick as some were expecting. And even in places where Russian forces have withdrawn, they reportedly leave behind landmines that slow the Ukrainian advance. CNN's Katie Pugliese is monitoring developments for us in London. So Katie, again, it's been a constant theme this week, more pushback from Ukraine on the state of the counteroffensive.
Absolutely, Kim. They are very insistent that this counteroffensive is going ahead with success. And I think really to sum up that insistence, a tweet yesterday from Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky really encapsulated it. He said, quite simply, Ukrainian forces are moving forward. Despite everything and no matter what anyone says, we are advancing, and that is the most important thing. We are on the move. Now, the what everyone says is a clear reference to clearly comments he's received, criticism perhaps of how slow this counteroffensive appears to have been moving. And I think that confidence, really, that insistence that he's having there is perhaps because there has been some progress. There have been some marginal gains on this southern frontier, this front line that we've been talking about. Robotynia, a village in the Zaporizhia region, they recently recaptured from the Russians. That is a clear success for the Ukrainians, and they have been moving further, progressing further on, south and east, eventually heading towards the Sea of Azov. But it's worth noting, and you referenced there earlier about the Donetsk region, that they are also targeting other areas, but the Russians also are too. We talk about Donetsk, there was also some shelling by the Russians as well, some Ukrainians injured overnight, and it's a reminder of the civilian toll of this conflict, that while Ukraine is targeting this one particular area of the front line, there is a very long front line, with the other areas also still receiving a lot of Russian attacks, and other areas of Ukraine still receiving a lot of Russian drone attacks as well.
Yeah, and one of those other areas being attacked, the Odessa region. Tell us more about that.
Well, Kim, Odessa has been a key region that we've talked about a lot in this conflict, and it's because it's a port where a lot of Ukrainian grain is exported from. Ukraine's grain is really sourced to the rest of the world. It's one of the key grain exporters, and food security has been really impacted by this conflict with Ukraine and Russia. And so as a result of that, there was the UN-backed deal called the Black Sea Grain Deal that was basically set up to ensure that grain could get out of Ukraine's ports. And what we've been seeing since Russia then withdrew from this deal earlier this year is that there have been a lot of accusations of Russia targeting this port infrastructure, targeting areas where this grain is produced, including warehouses. And what we've seen in the early hours is yet again this port infrastructure in Odessa being targeted. You can see that there was fire as a result. Ukraine says that firefighters were quick to extinguish it, but it did result in 2 people wounded as well as a result. So clearly these kind of drone attacks are going to continue. And as we've talked about with drone attacks this week, it's another interesting sign that drone attacks are being used by both the Ukrainians and the Russians in this conflict.
What more do we know, though, about this latest alleged attempt on that bridge again to Crimea?
Well, Paula, this time we're looking at sea drones rather than aerial drones, which is what we've been talking about a lot of this week. So sea drones really are unmanned boats with explosives on board. And that is what hit the Kerch Bridge you mentioned just overnight and in the early hours of this morning. There's 3 stages to this attack, according to the Russia's Ministry of Defense. There was one at around 11 p.m. last night and then 2 in the early hours of this morning. They claim they intercepted all, but there was clearly damage as the movement of vehicles across the bridge has been stopped temporarily. Now, look, these sea drones, if they are coming from Ukraine, and they are widely suspected to be so, will have had to travel hundreds of miles to get there. The nearest Ukrainian-controlled territory, probably around the area of Odessa, is quite a long way away from where the Kerch Bridge is and where, of course, this Kerch Bridge links to, which is the Russian mainland as well as the occupied Crimea. And this is part of the tactic we've been seeing with these drone attacks, reaching far into Russian territory and really quite far away from the front line. These drone attacks come in a week of other drone assaults, as you've mentioned earlier, as did Melissa, of these many different attacks deep into Russian territory, as far north as Moscow, even beyond to Pskov and that airport there. And And these drones in particular, the sea drones, well, Ukraine haven't commented as to whether they are behind them, but they have previously spoken to CNN about their pride in these weaponry. We've actually spoken to Ukraine's head of the security service, on this before, and he said that this was a unique invention by the Ukrainians. It's not private companies that have developed this sea drone, it is Ukrainians themselves. And this is part of what we're seeing here with Ukraine's weapon domestic capability. They are developing these weapons themselves as part of an aim to show Russia and show their Western allies that they are able to continue this counteroffensive, continue this war with their own domestic weapons capability. And that could be a significant turning point in taking the world forward. Paula.
Joining us now live from Kyiv is Anna Novosad. She's co-founder of the education foundation Saved and is a former Minister of Education and Science. And I'm really happy to have you here to talk about the challenges, right? It is heartbreaking to look at that video and think all that these students are facing. And of course, you can see the anxiety on their parents' faces. What is the biggest challenge ahead, do you think, this year? Because I can see so many are determined to make sure their kids go back to school.
Hello, Paula. Greetings from Kyiv. It's a forced September, forced academic year when Ukrainian kids cannot go normally to school. It's been 2 years of COVID, and now it's the second September of the fully fledged war of Russia against us. And by now, as was rightly mentioned, Russia has destroyed every 10th school in our country. It's more than 1,500 schools in Ukraine are destroyed, and that's not only in the east or south that are closer to the front lines, but basically all over the country, because the missiles unfortunately reach the territory from east to west. So I would say that the biggest challenge was access to education. According to the official data, this year we'll have around 1 million of school children who will only attend schools online. So it's a fourth year of online learning, which means basically no learning at all. And that's so because they have no schools, or it's too dangerous to attend them, or they do not have bomb shelters, even if they have schools. So there are a number of reasons why that happens. The second concern is, of course, the learning loss, because the 4 years of this situation of having no access to better education will not really go without its consequences. And I travel a lot through liberated areas trying to see how we can help. And I see kids of primary school age who cannot talk, who cannot speak with adults, who cannot communicate, who cannot count, who cannot read, because they haven't been to school for quite a long time.
So much learning loss there, and obviously parents must be concerned about their early childhood development. You know, you were saying that you travel around the country. It's vastly different though, right? I mean, what is the situation in the West compared to those families dealing with the challenges so close to the front line?
Exactly. That's one of the things to understand about the current situation in Ukraine, that it's a huge country and the situation in different regions is very different, including with access to education. So it is a bit calmer in the west and in the central Ukraine. It's, I would say, only missiles that reach those territories, not artillery, for instance.